Welcome to Work from the Inside Out, a podcast that highlights real-life stories, practical strategies, and best practices for transitioning your career from unhappiness and dissatisfaction to fulfillment, meaning, and joy. Now here is your host, career and executive coach, Tammy Guler-Loeb.
Hey everybody, I am so delighted to introduce my guest today, Rebecca Seal. Rebecca is a freelance journalist and author and occasional television presenter. She has been freelance for the last 12 years, mostly writing about food and drink. But 6 years ago, she had an idea for a book about how to survive working alone, because she wasn't. She wrote most of Solo, How to Work Alone and Not Lose Your Mind in 2019, and finished it in the first UK lockdown. It came out in the UK in 2020 and the US, Australia, and New Zealand in February 2021 and has been translated into multiple languages. Now she finds herself giving talks and workshops, as well as writing articles on coping with solitary working to all sorts of people around the world. At the same time, she continues to write and publish cookbooks and to work for UK newspapers. In addition, she has recently launched a podcast called The Solo Collective, in which she has conversations with all kinds of solo entrepreneurs. She has 2 kids who are 6 and 4 and lives in London with her husband, with whom she also runs a photography studio. Please join me in welcoming Rebecca Seal. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hi. When you list it all like that, it sounds like so much.
Well, it is. It is. And I have to say, I was impressed the first time I heard about you, and I'm impressed now. And I will touch on this at some point, I know, but as I was looking at your bio and I'm seeing occasional television presenter, I'm thinking, I think you've been more than occasional television presenter.
I was.
We'll get to that in a moment. But anyway, as you know, Work from the Inside Out, it's all about the journeys that we've been on. You've been on an amazing journey from where I sit. And yet we all started somewhere. Some of us had dreams as children. Some of us were raised to have a variety of beliefs about who we would become as adults, or had, sets of beliefs about what we should think about work or career. Some of us didn't. But take us back to some of your earlier years and how those might have informed where you are today.
That's a really interesting question. I think I probably was mainly motivated by what other people thought. I'm like a classic people-pleasing person and a recovering people-pleaser, I should probably say.
Oh, good.
So I think a lot of the choices that I made in my sort of teens and early 20s were to do with what I thought other people's expectations were of me. I mean, whether they were or not, I don't know. Certainly the school that I went to expected me to do something big, and pushed me towards going to a really good university and all of that kind of thing. I'm not really sure that was the best or most healthy way of treating a young person. In retrospect, I'm kind of beginning to unpick the idea that maybe it would be better to let people be a little bit more free and have a bit more autonomy. I'm sure they thought they were doing absolutely the right thing, but in the end, I went to the London School of Economics to study international relations, which was challenging for a number of reasons. One is that the London School of Economics is really challenging anyway, in and of itself. 2, I don't think I probably made quite the right choice of course for me, notwithstanding the fact that, I've got good friends from that time and I did get through my degree. But I don't really know why I did it, apart from a few people said, I think you'd like to do this. And also because I was kind of all round bright kid. people thought I should do PPE at Oxford or Cambridge, politics, philosophy and economics.
Wow.
And I didn't want to do that. I knew I didn't want to do that, but a kind of close second was international relations, in as much as you did a lot of different things at the same time. And so that felt like a good middle ground of kind of meeting expectations, but doing something that wasn't PPE. And so I ended up there, and I think
a bit of a compromise.
Yeah, it was. I didn't realize that at the time. I was desperate to go there, and I got waitlisted. So I got accepted everywhere else that I applied, and LSE didn't let me know until maybe a couple of months before the beginning of term that I could have a place, which should have maybe rung some alarm bells that perhaps it wasn't the right place for me. But I actually found it really stressful. I'm sure it was in some ways like not the making of me. That isn't a really appropriate way of thinking about it, but I'm sure it helped rub some edges off. But I just found it really hard, because I went from being this really bright kid to being a really not bright kid in the comparison with everybody else. I was very close to the bottom, and that was a really painful place to be when you'd been at the top for a really long time. Now, in the grand scheme of things, it probably was quite a good thing for me. I'm not sure cruising through life at the top of the pile is the best for one's personality, but
that happens to a lot of people, especially they grow up in one environment, and they shine, and then there's all these expectations, and then they go to then they become a smaller fish in a bigger pond, right?
Yeah. I felt like a very small fish.
Now, how old were you when you went?
I was only just 18. I was 2 weeks past my 18th birthday. I didn't take a year out, which I probably would have benefited from. I hadn't worked. I'd never been away from home, properly. I'd been on holiday and stuff, but I'd never lived by myself or any of that. And I just felt really adrift, and in all of the senses, just unmoored from my kind of my mental health, from my sense of self, from all of it really. And it took quite a long time to get myself together, although I'm not sure I actually managed it until after I'd left university. And as a consequence, I left with this 2-1 degree, fine, very decent degree, having worked incredibly hard to achieve it, and then spent a few years working in restaurants, because I just I couldn't seem to get a job anywhere else. I had this idea that I would go and work for a non-governmental organization, or that initially I was going to go and work for the UN, definitely, because obviously the UN was definitely going to want me. I couldn't even get an interview for anything, let alone like a job. So I was back home in Oxford waitressing, and feeling just really stuck. Fundamentally stuck. And it's, again, I think it's a good experience to have had. I wish I hadn't had it at the time in a way, but it's brilliant to understand the hospitality industry from a kind of front of house point of view in terms of writing about it now. I feel really lucky to have had that experience. And again, I'm sure it kind of knocked some edges off me in the process too, and made me more of a team player and all of that stuff. But I did feel fundamentally really stuck and really lost again.
Those are such tender years. And I think I've said this before, I'll say it again, I'm sure. I think 18 is a strange age to expect somebody, with a few exceptions, a very odd age to expect somebody to know what they want to do with the rest of their life. And we live in a time when very, very rarely does somebody decide what they want to do, and that it's even going to last the rest of their lives. And we will learn more about your story now, but look, you've made some significant changes over the course of your career. And are continuing to. So it's it's crazy, I think, to say to someone at 18 or someone 16, 17, well, you got to figure it out now. You need to know what your major is going to be. And so that when you finish school, you're going to be on some kind of linear path that's going to take you through a progression of roles or jobs so that you can be successful.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, in your experience when you finished at the at LSE, as you say. Now I feel like I know I'm in the club now. Was it in terms of these expectations, these high expectations that you felt, being that people pleaser at the time, was it difficult for you to go back home and work as a waitress? What were the expectations of
Yeah.
you from family or other people who you knew had been holding you up to some kind of standard?
Yeah. I mean, I think I felt a kind of a whole variety of things. There was part of me that sort of felt like, well, hang on a sec. I've met your side of the deal, like universe, family, whatever it might be. I've done the things you wanted me to do. I studied really hard. I did all of the stuff around my my A-level qualifications that allow you to get into university. So I did all the extra language stuff, and I did, extra courses in my lunch hour, and I volunteered, and I was on the student council, and I did all that stuff so that my application form looked really good. And then I went to this really good university, and I did a really prestigious course, and I got a decent grade at the end of it all. And then I came out and I was like, right, and then nothing happened. So I felt fantastically let down in many ways, because I was like, but I've met my side of the deal. I did all the things that everyone expected me to do. So what's the prize?
Well, and also you were told, if you do all these things, right? You will
be happy and successful.
You will be successful, right?
Yeah.
And then started applying for the kinds of jobs that people get, right?
Yeah.
With that background, and you were not meeting with that kind of success.
No, because I think the people from that kind of background, they had also been going on through university doing all of the extra stuff, like all the extracurricular stuff. And I didn't have the capacity to do that, because I was so completely blown apart by the process of actually doing the academic stuff. So I didn't do any of this, the student newspaper or the societies or the athletics union or any of that. I just literally studied, and then just didn't have the bandwidth. So there was that feeling on the one hand, and then on the other hand, there was this this kind of empty feeling of just not knowing what it was that I wanted anyway. Right. So I didn't know what the next step should be. I was still doing the things that were expected. Mm-hmm. I was still, on that same very specific path, because I was completely unaccustomed to thinking independently about what I might want to do. And I was also heavily influenced by the fact that a lot of my peers had walked straight out of courses at the university particularly into management consultancy jobs, which I have never not found hilarious, because the idea that somebody who's like 22 and has got a great degree from the London School of Economics, but has never managed anybody. Like as I moved up in the restaurant ranks and became an assistant manager, I had more management experience. Like I was managing a team of 20 people at times, and they had never even worked, let alone. And then they were going off and working for these massive consultancy companies, which I just found very funny. But on the one hand, I could see the ridiculousness, but on the other, I would go to parties, come back to London to go to parties and things, and people would be talking about their offices and, the office that they had, their singular office in which they sat, not on a bank of desks, and, talking about promotions and salaries. And I was on, £20,000 a year, maybe less, I can't really remember, plus tips, and, living in my parents' house and just thinking, wow, I'm really screwing this up, but I have no idea how to untangle it. So that was fun.
Well, yeah. I mean, and you're not alone. I mean, you might have felt alone at that point, but I think I am guessing that there are a number of people listening to this who will be feeling the pain along with you, at least back then. And those are, as I said, those are tender years, those 20s, and I think all that time you're trying to figure out who you are. And as you're saying, you were being told who you should be all those years. This is who you should be. Here's what success looks like.
Yeah.
So you started out in the restaurant industry because it was sort of the default at that.
Yeah, and I'd worked there in the holidays before to earn money during university. So, it was an easy place to slip back into. I knew exactly how to do it. I was really good at it, and it was straightforward, and the people were nice. It was a nice place. Like there was nothing to actively dislike on a day-to-day basis, just this sort of nagging sensation that I wasn't where I should be, but with no clue about where that would be. Then something happened which was kind of dramatic. So I applied for a job. Sorry, not a job. I applied to do a master's degree in international peace and security at King's College London, and I got waitlisted again. And I was like, what is it about me? And I then had an experience at the restaurant which somebody got very drunk, and it was very unpleasant, and I just very abruptly decided that I had to stop doing that it just wasn't the place for me to be working anymore. And it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't. I won't go into the details because the people in question know the story, and they've all worked very hard to kind of correct the ways in which things went wrong for them specifically, which I'm very proud of. I'm very impressed by. But it marked a moment where it became clear that I couldn't carry on. And then the next day after I'd quit, I got I got a letter saying that I could start at King's 3 or 4 days later. Like it was,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was September, and it was super soon. So I just kind of packed up my stuff and found somewhere to live really, really quickly, and then just was gone, and was back at King's, which is on the other side of the road from the London School of Economics. So it's this very odd thing where I was. They're rivals. They're super rivals. The athletics unions of the two steal each other's stuff all the time. Like they do nighttime raids on each other's departments and things. So that was quite strange. So I did that course and I really loved it. But in the meantime, I had been doing a lot of work experience at newspapers to try and get some work. And because it was clear that the non-governmental organisation side of things was never going to happen.
So you were in this master's program in, tell me again, it was international peace and
security. Yeah.
Security.
Yeah.
So why were you sure that it was?
Why was I doing that?
No, not why. It sounds like you still had an interest, right? But why were you sure that it wasn't going to happen, that you wouldn't necessarily get like an NGO type job?
I knew it wasn't going to happen unless I got a master's degree. So that was what I felt, was that I had to get this master's degree in order to have any way of getting through the door of any of these NGOs.
Got it.
And that felt like a sensible thing to do. But at the same time, I had this sort of parallel track of journalism and thinking, if that doesn't work out, then I've got that in my back pocket to kind of go and do instead. Or, and I'd done a bit of work experience during my university time as well. And I'd really enjoyed it. I'd worked at the Evening Standard newspaper for a summer, and it was brilliant. I really loved it. And I don't really know why I hadn't focused more intensely on that. Because it was so enjoyable, but I guess it was, another set of expectations type thing. So in the middle of the master's degree, I got offered a job at The Observer, which turned into my first proper journalism role. So I had to finish the master's degree while I was working.
Okay.
So, which was interesting. I got appendicitis in the middle of it all, actually. I ended up being hospitalized with appendicitis just before I had to hand in my final thesis. So it was, that was intense too. And yeah, so that took me to The Observer, and then I was at The Observer for 6 years. And that was great.
What kind of journalism were you practicing there?
So the first position was on a food magazine, a Sunday food magazine. Yeah. Which was just sort of luck. And and loveliness, really, because I had been working in the restaurants and I'd got into food, but I'd never contemplated food journalism as an option for me. But then an editor that I had done work experience before moved over to the Observer and was working on the food magazine, and then it all went from there. And so I spent 6 years doing predominantly food journalism.
So that's really interesting. So when you got to London, very quickly started the master's program.
Yeah.
And then applied to get, what was it going to be, like some freelance work at the Observer?
I had just been doing work experience. So I had just been there in and out for, I don't know, a year and a half or maybe longer. Just doing weeks of helping with things and helping with projects and unpaid, all trying to get a foot in the door.
Were you thinking that you might combine some of the international?
Yeah, I mean, I think at that point I thought I would be, I'd be a foreign correspondent, or something like that I would get onto the news desk. I mean, that's a very difficult place to get into. So,
but that was sort of the thought that,
okay. That was the pipe dream. Yeah. And even at the beginning, I think, of working on the food magazine, I was like, well, I'll just do this for a bit and then they'll notice me. Then the news desk will realize that I should be there. And, it's like such brilliant naivety when you're that young. You're just, you're so clueless.
It's kind of a nice place to live for a little while, that night.
Yeah, that's true. It comes with a few knocks when you realize that you've got it wrong. But yeah, so 6 years of food journalism was an amazing training ground. And I mean, hilariously, was really where I learned to write properly. I mean, I know that makes sense in some ways, but you would have thought that I would have got a bit more of that at school. And maybe a bit at university. But it was actually really very much in the newspapers where my grammar and things like that got properly honed.
Well, it's a different kind of writing too, though, I think, from in journalism than in an academic.
Yeah. I left school not knowing how to use the apostrophe properly. So despite my high levels of qualifications, I was schooled by an editor at the Evening Standard. I remember very clearly, and I've never misused it since.
Well, those of you from King's College who are listening right now.
Yeah. Just teach the basic grammar, just to make sure that people don't leave university unable to construct a decent sentence. Whatever subject they're studying.
I just rolled my eyes, everyone, if you could.
So funny. It's such a basic skill.
It is basic, and yet it's probably getting more and more challenging in some ways. Although now we have all kinds of apps that help us and remind us where to place things. But you've written several books. I've just finished writing a book, and I use Grammarly. And yet my editor, who's working on my book, found all kinds of things that I had not put in the right place. So you can never do it all quite right, I'm learning, but it's a learning curve, and it's an interesting one,
Yeah. And language is nuanced and subtle, and sometimes you want to play around with the rules. I mean, that's the important thing about learning them, is that sometimes you want to misuse something for effect. And apps and algorithms can take that away from us, the kind of creativity, but also they're just not as precise as the human brain can be.
Right. No, it's not. Good point. So 6 years at the Observer, and you were with the food magazine the whole time. What ended your time at the Observer?
They offered everybody voluntary redundancy. It was just around the time of the crash in the what was it, 2006, 7? The crash happened. They needed to make some fairly radical changes. And I didn't have any dependents. I didn't have a mortgage. I didn't have anything to sort of stop me. And I just thought, if I'm ever going to try and be a freelance writer, which had become a bit more of a desire over the years, then this is the moment to try it. I kind of look back and think how incredibly brave that was and extraordinary that I did that, because it was such a bold move to give up a career with a trajectory, it would have been quite easy for me to have done that job for a few more years and then gone on to another more senior job and more senior. And, I could see a path to what I do now, which has no path. It's kind of extraordinary in a way that I found the courage to do that. I mean, my now husband, he was my boyfriend at the time, would say that it took 6 months of grappling with it, and it was extremely difficult to live with. Well, this endless dithering conversation went on about whether I would leave or not. But
yeah, you would leave the Observer.
Yeah, whether I would go for it or not. But in the end, I finally did. And because I was taking redundancy, it meant I got a bit of a settlement, which meant that I had a little bit of capital to make it less terrifying, which is always the advice that I give to people who go freelance. If you save 3 months worth of rent, it is a lot less scary.
Yeah. Well, I think it sounds so daring. And, when you hear that somebody made a move, but you don't hear all the things that happened in between, really, you don't just pick up and move. You try to have a plan.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's always I always say have a plan B and have a plan C.
Yeah. Yeah.
Plan B is your backup. Plan C is cash. How do you just bring in cash if you need to?
Yeah.
Right? Because there was always something else you could do if you had to.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm curious, though. It sounds like you had it swirling in the back of your mind for a while that you wanted to go freelance. What were the reasons why, or what were the kinds of things you were kind of dreaming of doing as a freelance writer versus what you were doing at the Observer?
I mean, I guess it was mostly that I just didn't write that much at the Observer. I was an editor first, or an assistant editor. And therefore I was sending people to do things that I really wanted to do all the time, arranging people's train tickets and plane tickets to go all over the world to interview interesting people and to try out interesting things. And then editing their copy when it came back, which is an amazing training ground in terms of becoming a writer yourself.
Yeah.
But the writing I was doing was, again, very useful training, but it was TV reviews, book reviews, art reviews, occasional comment pieces, op-eds about issues of the day that were relevant to sort of 24-year-old women. That was my sort of, it was nice for them, I think, to have a voice of someone of my age and stage. There were a few of us at the same sort of age, and we all did this kind of writing. But that was all in addition to my actual job. So I always had to make sure that I wasn't doing that to the exclusion of what I was meant to be doing. So that made it quite, it was exciting and it was full and it was busy, but my actual writing was quite limited by the fact that I had a whole other job that wasn't to do with writing at all.
Right.
So I think that was what was itching away inside me, that sense that, well, what if I was one of those writers? What if, would that be possible? And I don't know that, I don't think it would have been feasible. Well, it definitely wouldn't have been feasible to become a writer within the Observer, because they've already got a pool of unbelievably good writers. And I'm a decent writer, right? But I don't have any, I'm not a Pulitzer Prize winning type journalist, and they had those people. So it was never going to happen for me within the Observer or, any of those newspapers, that I would become a staff writer and that would be all they would want from me, because I was valuable in other ways, but not that way.
Never say never.
Yeah.
So you became a freelance writer, and I know it worked out.
Yes. Yeah, it has worked out. It's been about 12 years now. And funnily and wonderfully, I do write for the Observer and for the Guardian and their sister publications. And I always find it, profound in a way as an experience to find myself doing something which I've wanted for such a long time. There's very few places that I wanted to write as much as I wanted to write there. I think if I wrote for Vanity Fair, that would probably be a bucket list, because I've never done that. There's very, like the New York Times, Vanity Fair, that kind of thing. But in the UK, the Guardian and the Observer and the Financial Times, who I also now write for occasionally, they occupy a very particular position in terms of the quality of what they publish. And So it feels incredible to, once or twice a year to have pieces in all those places. That feels like a real unbelievable, like literally unbelievable situation to have wangled. So
you've been doing this for 12 years. You've published in all those publications. And as I'm listening to you, I can see, the listeners can't see this, but I can see in your face that you are still kind of starry-eyed about it. You are still almost amazed that you get to do this.
Yeah, definitely. Which is not to say that it's easy or that it's straightforward. I think all the pieces that I write, are in some way or other a real challenge, and can take weeks to put together sometimes, and often feel like you're really kind of climbing a massive cliff face and you don't know quite how to get to the top. But it feels like a massive privilege and a surprise to be in those publications. And also, I mean, the editors at those places, I think what people don't necessarily know about features journalism in particular is that it's a hugely collaborative process. Mm-hmm. And what I first send in is often quite altered by me and other people in the process of getting it to being print ready. And that can feel quite painful in the actual doing, mm-hmm. but it's a richly collaborative process. And I'm really grateful for it. I'm really grateful to work with these brilliant editors. So that I think it's not just the kudos of the publication, it's about the people at the publications who kick your stuff into shape. And that's quite amazing.
So it's the process. It's not just the end result that you appreciate. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And also the process is such it's so fascinating because you're always trying to get really under the skin of a subject that often is not one that you know anything about, the day before. And so you have permission to ask all of these fascinating people, interviewees and experts. And, I love that. I love the kind of polymathic quality to it where, a couple of weeks ago, I was writing about new technologies to help people who work from home communicate. So things that are not Zoom, virtual worlds and VR workspaces and all sorts of things. My next piece is about gut health and how far along the science is or isn't in terms of what we know about gut health and its relationship with mental health and physical health. It's insanely varied, which is sort of exhausting, but also brilliant because it's never boring.
It's what I call a good kind of exhausting.
Yeah. Yeah. You can feel your brain flexing.
I was curious what kinds of pieces you've been writing. So that's really interesting. Really interesting. Now, at some point you went into television. You went in front of the camera. So tell us a little bit about how that evolved.
Yeah, that was weird. And it wasn't so much of an evolution as just this kind of extremely abrupt thing that happened. So I was working without me intending it to. I was working at Soho House, the group of members clubs. I was doing some magazine work for them. I was editing a couple of magazines, and a television show called Sunday Brunch was looking for a female drinks expert. And I was editing a drinks magazine, and they picked up the scout from the show picked up the magazine and saw that the editor was a woman, and just found my email address and asked if I would come in and do a screen test. I was like, yeah, fine, whatever. I'd done a few screen tests before and nothing had ever come of it. So I was very laid back about it because I was just like, well, nothing's going to happen. And also they didn't tell me what it was. So it was like a top secret thing, and they really didn't fill me in at all. And so I went in and did a few screen tests, and they were fine, and everyone was very enthusiastic. But in TV, everybody is like, you're amazing. I love you so much. And then nothing happened. So I wasn't taken in by it. And then on the Wednesday of this particular week, I got a call saying, yeah, you've got the job and you start on Sunday. And I was like, what? And also, what's the job? And they then they told me that it was Sunday Brunch, which was transferring from the BBC to Channel 4, which is, the big main channels in the UK. And that was why they needed to change certain elements of the show, because they had to create a new format for it. And that I would be starting on Sunday, and I would have 2 sections of the show where I would be presenting drinks, like cocktails or tastings, to the main 2 presenters, who were already really famous people here, and a selection of celebrity guests. And that I would be doing that on Sunday. And then they kind of went, click, put the phone down. And I was like, what just happened? What? And I'm almost glad that I had such a short period of time to get prepared for it, because I think I would have probably passed out otherwise. So just having a few days was kind of fine, because it was a blur of trying to write the script and get everything sorted and find something to wear and all of that kind of thing. And then suddenly I was in the TV studio on a Sunday morning at kind of 7:00 in the morning rehearsing, and then did my first bit at 9:30 in the morning, I think. And then I did it every week for 4 years, every Sunday.
It does seem like things sort of show up quickly in your life. And
it does, doesn't it?
Again, like the master's degree. Oh, you're in, but you have to be here in 4 days.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. I've never thought of that. I've never thought of those parallels. But yes, you're right. They do. So, yeah.
It's really funny.
Yeah.
So 4 years of Sunday mornings.
Yes.
And it was all about drinks the whole time, right?
I did move into doing food stuff towards the very end. I was pregnant with my first child for a chunk of that time. And we mutually agreed that I probably couldn't do tequila tastings on screen while visibly pregnant. That wasn't a good look.
That doesn't send a very good message, does it?
No, exactly. So, So
you were freelancing, doing the Sunday mornings.
Yeah.
And then I know that you've published a whole slew of cookbooks too. Where does that come into the mix?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, that was sort of something that happened to me rather than being something I planned. I edited a cookbook for The Observer towards the end of my period of time there, which was, an interesting creative endeavor. Not that successful, really, I think. But a really good training ground. And then was kind of invited by a publishing house to come in and have conversation about other books that I might like to do, which doesn't ever happen. And the result was my first cookbook, which was 8 or 9 years ago now. And that was a book about food in Istanbul. Then I did a book about food in the Greek islands, then another about food in Lisbon. And then after that one, I was invited to start doing, collaborating with a restaurant group called Leon, which is quite a big group over here. And they wanted me to help them write their cookbooks. So that's the rest of my cookbooks have been with them. And that's been a blast. That's been great. Because again, it's this lovely collaboration. I don't have to go into an office, but I do have a collection of people to work with, and that's lovely.
So when you're writing a cookbook, are you creating all the recipes and testing them and everything? So and you're not a trained chef, so.
No, I'm not. I mean, 6 years at The Observer was spent doing an awful lot of recipe editing and also a lot of extracting recipes. So I read a lot of recipe books. But yes, I'm not trained. I'm a home cook. But in a way, I feel as though it has its advantages and disadvantages in as much as I'm very ordinary in my understanding and, when I worked for Soho House, we did a lot of recipes in the magazine that were written by the chefs. So I'm very good at de-chefing recipes. So I had a lot of recipe experience. So nice. it made more sense that way. Less practical experience, but a lot of written experience.
I would imagine that would be great for the home cooks, because you are making it accessible for people who don't necessarily want to spend 5 hours putting together a recipe. Right?
Yeah. And in fact, the books that I've done with Leon, they're quite small format books. So the pages are quite small. So the recipes have to be by necessity relatively short. And that's, again, it's an interesting skill. It's a way I like playing with language, when it's a bit like tweeting, when you're given a very specific framework in which to operate, it's actually quite a creative experience, because you're trying quite hard to figure out how to do the best with a small capacity. So yeah, I enjoy that challenge too.
Wow. So you've got so this was all happening while you were also doing the Sunday mornings and doing some freelance work. You're writing cookbooks. And then where was the transition to writing solo, your most current book?
So, I mean, I make it sound as though it was all very jolly and, really exciting work. And I loved it. And I did that. Those things are true to a point, but I was also very close to burning out.
Okay.
And if not burnt out, and very lonely, because I was basically doing nothing but work, which, when you list it all, makes sense. I'm working at the weekends. My clients weren't particularly aware that I was working at the weekends. So why would they know that I needed to maybe not work so hard during the week? I think at one point I was doing the show and I had a column in the Evening Standard. So I had a weekly deadline.
Oh, wow.
And then I had quarterly deadlines for Soho House. I think I had a monthly column. I had a monthly recipe column somewhere else. Was writing books sort of in tandem with all of this, and never saying no to anything.
You have family.
I didn't have kids at that point, but I was going through IVF.
Oh, is that all?
So yeah, just a small emotional baggage. So we had found out that we had fertility problems, and that took 5 years. So over this whole time, basically, that I was doing television and so on, we were trying to navigate that stuff. So my daughter is 6.5, my oldest daughter. So it was before I got pregnant with her. So it must be about, maybe 7.5 years ago that I had the idea. I thought it was 6 years ago, but actually must be longer, that I had the idea to write solo, because I was so miserable, and I just couldn't work out what I was doing wrong exactly with my freelance career, because it sort of looked so good from a kind of on paper point of view, but it wasn't making me happy at all. And I felt as though I just sort of looked up and looked around and thought, oh, hang on, this isn't what I wanted. But again, thought, what is it that I want? Bearing in mind, so many of these things happened to me, which I'm grateful for, don't get me wrong, but there wasn't much in the way of planning. And that, I don't think that's a problem in and of itself, but I think you have to be careful. If you take a lot on, you have to be careful to build in things you do want and time when nothing's happening as well. And there was just no rest. We hadn't managed to have a holiday because I was always doing the show and all of that stuff. So I went looking for a book to try and figure out how to navigate this stuff, and I couldn't find one. And obviously the sensible solution to being really burned out at work is deciding to write another book. That is definitely the way forward. Do not do this at home, folks. But I did wait. So I didn't write the book until 2019, or at least start the book until 2019. So I think it was a 4-year lag between writing the proposal and actually sending it out to publishers.
You also stopped doing the TV show too.
Yeah. So when I had the kids, I just started doing it very irregularly. And now I do it maybe 2 or 3 times a year, which is lovely and a real treat whenever I do it.
Right.
But fits a lot better in with the having of the small children, because I have a 6.5-year-old and a 4-year-old, and it's hard. It would be really hard to be away from them every weekend, and also working in the week too. So I just don't know how I would handle that, really.
There is something about having children that kind of brings you back down to earth a little bit.
Yes. Yeah. The biggest change it forced upon me, which I'm again grateful for, is I now do a 4-day week. So I went from doing a 6.5-day week to a 4-day week, because the way we split our childcare. My husband does a 4-day week and I do a 4-day week. And frankly, we are both exponentially happier for that restriction being placed upon our work time. And I'm kind of nervous about what happens next year because, next academic year, because my youngest will start school in September and that will be 5 days a week when the kids are in school. And I could theoretically just slip straight back into doing a 5-day week. And I don't know if I want to do that because actually I think it's been very good for me not. So I need to have a serious conversation with myself about how I manage that, I think.
Well, you can always give me a call. I'll be happy to have a serious conversation with you.
Okay, deal.
I think there's a theme running through here, right? It was either someone else was making your plan for you, right? Well, it was always somebody else making your plan for you, whether they knew it or not.
Yeah.
And people were inviting you to do things that were interesting and you stepped into them. And so easily those 4 days could turn into 5.
Yeah.
Easily.
Yeah.
And as the kids get older, it could turn into a whole lot more as the kids get more independent, right?
Yeah.
So it's a choice. It's a choice. No doubt about it.
Well, interestingly, I'm working very hard on this stuff at the moment. During the pandemic's worst section last year, I decided I needed to go back to having therapy because I was having real difficulty with the anxiety, like I'm sure about 95% of the rest of the world was too. Mm-hmm. And that's been really useful, but it's also shown me that this is a real kind of feature of my decision-making process and the way that my life's unfolded. So I don't think, these patterns are hard to break, but I don't think that I will be as unaware of this stuff as I have been historically. Yeah. I think that things will be better. I'm hopeful that I'll be a little bit more discerning, maybe, I don't know. But funnily enough, my word of the year is choose. So I've never done a word of the year before, but a friend of mine was talking about hers and it just popped into my head that choose had to be this year's word. Yeah. So it's been quite helpful having that as a sort of talisman around.
Yeah. It's not even about having a 4-day week. It is about having a choice. You know what I mean? Like once your oldest starts school, it could be that you decide to go to a 4.5-day week. It may not even be about how much time you spend, but the choice is about what you're doing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so speaking of things that you've added on, you now have a podcast.
That was a choice though. I wanted that.
Right. So tell us a little bit about the podcast, The Solo Collective. Let's hear about that.
Well, I just felt as though I wrote the book before the pandemic, before anybody used phrases like the future of work and hybrid working in normal conversation. Obviously I was aware of them because I'd been reading and researching this stuff for years, but it wasn't something that kind of popped up in the mainstream media all the time. And I had this really strong sense. Actually, I'd had it since the very beginning of the idea for Solo that a series of conversations would be really fascinating around the topic of solo work. And so I went looking for a production company to sort of support me with it because I knew that I had no audio skills and my broadcast skills were not particularly strong either. And I just felt like I wanted to do it as a collaboration and with support because I wasn't sure that I would even do it if I was trying to do it by myself. So I was really lucky to find a great company called Chalk and Blade who really loved the idea and wanted to get in on it. And it's been great. We've done 12 episodes for the first series. And in each one, I interview a sort of an expert or a big thinker on a particular topic that's related to solitary working, but also talk to them about what their solitary working life looks like, because obviously almost all of them have been forced into solitary working, even if that isn't what they did before. So they've had a year of something quite extraordinary. Anyway, so that's been fascinating. But I just think it's really important for people who work by themselves to hear the stories of other solo workers, partly for the things which are similar and reassuring, and partly for the things that are different and present opportunities. I think the thing about choice is a very interesting point that you were making just now, because one of the things I wrote in the solo book was that whenever we're working by ourselves, we have multiple choices all of the time, but very often we don't perceive them.
Right.
As I have done for such a long time, things happen to you and they wash over you. And you don't realize that you have a choice about where you work or what your hours are or what you say yes to, or what you charge or any of that stuff. It feels like it's dictated, even though it's not at all. So I wanted to kind of illuminate that. But I also wanted to show people that there are different ways of doing solo work. So I always ask the people I interview, what does your solo working life look like? What have you done recently to change? What's working for you? What's not? What do you like about it? What do you want to, what's difficult? Because I just think that's a gift to give to other solo workers, the opportunity to hear like, oh, right, this really successful person does a 4-day week, or this other really successful person works in blocks of time. So they do 10 days of working and then they book 2 full weeks off, and then they don't work during those 2 weeks at all, and that really works for me. Wait, so I don't have to do a 9 to 5, 5 days a week. I could think completely creatively and change up this whole system. And I think I didn't have that when I was starting out as a freelancer. And I want very much to bring out as much of those conversations as possible so that other people don't fall down the same holes that I did, basically. Because I think, that's an opportunity, isn't it, to help?
It's a great opportunity. And it gives people a window. Because I think when people go off on their own initially, they think, oh, I'm going to have so much control over my schedule. That's what I always hear. And then all of a sudden they're feeling like, oh, but I've got to bring in work. So I'm going to say yes to everything. And then next thing you know, they get burnt out, they get stressed, and all of that. And
ill, it's not like we bandy burnout as a term around, like, oh, it was burnout. Like that doesn't really, I think, unless you've experienced it in its kind of real raw form, I don't think people really understand how significant and how dangerous it is, and how hard it is to recover from, and how long it might hit you for, and how badly that might affect your business. It's really important not to do it.
Exactly. There's being exhausted, and then there's burnout. There's a big difference. Big difference on a clinical level. Absolutely. But on a brighter note, if people want to find you, learn more about what you're doing, read some of your books or read some of your articles or follow you, what's the best way for them to find you?
I mean, there's so many. So the best way is probably my website, rebeccaseal.co.uk. Or if you want specific information about the solo book and stuff around solitary working, then howtoworkalone.com.
Oh, nice.
I can't believe I got that website.
We'll have all of that in the show notes. And I'm sure people are going to flock to that. And on a final note here, if you had to give somebody who was thinking about making some kind of a transition, a next step in their career, whether they were even changing jobs or going solo or going off on their own freelance, what would be one piece of advice that you would say is an important piece of advice you would give?
Apart from saving 3 months worth of rent, which is critical, I would say do the thing that I didn't do for a really long time, which is to sit down with a bit of paper and look inside yourself to see what you want your life to look like. Mm-hmm. Don't make a plan for your career, make a plan for your life, and really visualize what you want things to look like in 5 years' time or 10 years' time. And then ask yourself whether the next step that you're thinking of making serves that. I didn't do that. It's by luck, not judgment, that things have untangled themselves in a positive way. But now I do that. And I can tell you that the difference is really profound. Like I don't have a plan in as much as I know what my next step will be in my career, but I know what I want from my life. Right. I know that I don't want to be burned out. I know that I want to continue to have a really great marriage. I know that I want to be a present parent for my children. I know that I want a healthy body and a healthy brain. And everything that I do now, as much as I possibly can, is in service to that idea. Right. I didn't have that before. And it's a profound shift. So I recommend that really strongly.
Well, that is a perfect note for us to end on. And I say end only because we're stopping this particular episode, but I know we're going to be hearing more from you. Thank you so much for being here today, Rebecca.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a delight.
It has been great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wasn't that fun? I hope you enjoyed my interview with Rebecca Seal. It was so interesting to speak with her about her personal and professional journey. What is your key takeaway from our interview? If you're interested in any of the resources or links mentioned in today's show, you can find them on the blog page of my website at tammygoulerloeb.com. Just look for episode 139. Are you anticipating your next professional move? Or perhaps you're feeling just a little stuck? Stay tuned for my new book, Work from the Inside Out. Break through 9 common obstacles to design a career that fulfills you. It will be available very soon, September 2021, in both print and digital ebook editions through my website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and some independent bookstores. If you were inspired by this episode with Rebecca, please share it with your friends and colleagues. And please do subscribe so you don't miss next week's show. Remember, subscribing is always free. Are you enjoying the podcast? Oh, I'd love to read your review on Apple Podcasts. It's easy to find through my website at tammygoulerloeb.com/podcast. Just click on the Apple Podcast button and follow the instructions provided. Thank you so much for listening. And remember, it's never too late or too impossible to increase your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction in your work and other meaningful activities. Let me know how it's going for you. Drop me a line. I'd love to hear from you. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to the Work from the Inside Out podcast. For more information, you can find us at www.workfromtheinsideout.com.